What happens when the silent partner is no longer silent? For 10 years, Ava Donovan was the invisible architect behind a billion-dollar empire while her husband Cole Harrington basked in the spotlight. She was the strategist, the operator, the steady hand that built Innovate Dynamics from a garage startup into a tech behemoth. He was the face, the charm, the celebrated CEO. But when the foundation of their perfect life, a foundation she meticulously built, is shattered by the oldest betrayal. In the book, she doesn't reach for a divorce lawyer to fight over the house and the cars. She reaches for a clause buried deep in the company's bylaws, a secret fail-safe she created long ago. This isn't a story about a marriage ending. It's the story of how a woman pushed to the edge reminded everyone who truly held the power all along. The penthouse on the 72nd floor of 157 wasn't just a home. It was a statement. From the floor-to-ceiling windows, Manhattan sprawled below like a glittering circuit board, a city of infinite connections and buzzing energy. It was a view that Cole Harrington, CEO of Innovate Dynamics, felt he had earned. He would often stand there, a glass of Macallan 25 in hand, and look down on the world he was conquering. His wife, Ava Donovan, preferred the view from the other side of the apartment, the one overlooking the quiet expanse of Central Park. To her, the park represented something organic, complex, and beautiful, a system that grew and thrived through intricate, unseen processes. It was much like the company she had helped build. On the surface, Cole and Ava were the ultimate power couple. He was impossibly handsome, with a charismatic smile and a voice that could coax venture capitalists into parting with 8-figure sums. He was the public face of Innovate Dynamics, gracing the covers of Forbes and Wired, giving TED Talks on the future of AI-driven logistics, and charming senators at DC fundraisers. Ava was his elegant, reserved counterpart. At charity galas, she was always perfectly dressed, a serene smile on her face, a supportive hand on his arm. Most people in their circle saw her as the classic billionaire's wife, a beautiful accessory who managed their homes in the city, and the Hamptons planned their social calendar and sat on philanthropic boards. They had no idea that she was the company's operational backbone. They had started Innovate Dynamics a decade ago in a cramped Palo Alto apartment. Cole was the visionary, the big ideas guy. He could see the future, but he couldn't build the road to get there. Ava, with her dual degrees in computer science and systems engineering from MIT, was the architect. She wrote the foundational code for their flagship software, Nexus, and designed the entire operational framework that allowed the company to scale. They had a simple arrangement in the beginning. Cole was CEO, the public face. Ava took the title of Chief Strategy Officer, a deliberately vague role that allowed her to work behind the scenes, unburdened by press interviews and shareholder meetings, which she despised. She managed the engineering teams, optimized the data flow, and ensured the intricate machine of the company ran without a single hiccup. Cole sold the dream. Ava built the reality. But over the years, the lines had blurred and history had been subtly rewritten. Cole's vision began to eclipse Ava's execution in the public narrative and eventually within the walls of their own home. He began to see her not as his partner, but as his most reliable employee. "Sweetheart, the numbers for the quarterly report look a little soft. Can you have your guys polish them up before the board meeting?" he'd say, not looking up from his phone as she passed him his morning espresso. Her guys. They were all her guys, the teams she had personally hired and mentored. "The server latency in the European sector is up by 0.2%. I've already deployed a patch," she'd reply, her tone even. "Great. Glad you're on top of it," he'd murmur, already absorbed in an email from his publicist. The condescension was subtle, 1,000 tiny cuts that had slowly eroded the foundation of their partnership. He had forgotten the all-nighters she pulled, the server fires she put out at 3 a.m., the ingenious algorithm she designed that had become the company's crown jewel. He saw the penthouse, the private jet, the glowing magazine articles, and believed they were reflections of his singular genius. Ava saw them as the joint output of a machine she had built, and now felt increasingly alienated from. Her world had become a gilded cage, beautiful and suffocating. The parties felt hollow. The praise directed at her husband felt like a form of erasure. The only place she still felt a sense of purpose was in the work itself. Late at night, long after Cole was asleep or out at a networking dinner, she would sit in her home office, a sleek, minimalist room that was her private sanctuary. The rest of the penthouse was decorated to Cole's ostentatious taste. But this room was all hers. On her monitors, lines of code and complex data streams flowed the pure, logical and honest language she understood better than anything. It was here in the silent hum of the servers that she was not Mrs. Harrington, the socialite, but Ava Donovan, the engineer, and it was this version of herself she was starting to miss more than anything. The first crack appeared not as a seismic tremor, but as a hairline fracture, almost invisible to the naked eye. It was a Tuesday night in late October. Cole was supposedly in Chicago closing a major deal with a logistics conglomerate. He was due back the next morning. Ava was working late, troubleshooting a persistent bug in a new software update. Around 11 p.m., her phone buzzed with a notification from their shared credit card account. Charge $758.90. Le Bernardin, New York, NY. Ava stared at the notification, a frown creasing her brow. Le Bernardin, one of the city's most exclusive and romantic restaurants, and definitely not in Chicago. It was probably a mistake, she told herself, a card skimmed or a delayed charge from a previous dinner. She dismissed it and went back to her work, but a small, cold seed of unease had been planted. The next morning, Cole returned jubilant. "We got it, Ava. The Omnicorp deal is done. They signed this morning." He kissed her, his suit jacket smelling faintly of travel and success. "Congratulations, Cole. That's fantastic," she said, managing a genuine smile. "How was Chicago?" "Cold, boring. All I saw was the inside of a conference room and my hotel. I ate room service and passed out." He said it so casually, so smoothly, that for a moment she believed him. But the Le Bernardin charge lingered in the back of her mind, a loose thread on a perfect tapestry. She decided not to pull it. Not yet. A week later, the second crack appeared. Cole was in a board meeting at the Innovate Dynamics headquarters on Park Avenue. Ava was working from her home office when a courier delivered a package for him, a custom-made suit from a tailor on Savile Row. As she signed for it, she noticed the faint scent of perfume clinging to the outer packaging. It was a fragrance she didn't recognize, floral with a sharp, musky undertone, something modern and aggressive. It was nothing like her own subtle classic Chanel No. 5. Again, she tried to rationalize it. The courier, perhaps, or someone in the tailor's shop. But the seed of unease was beginning to sprout. Ava was an engineer. She didn't deal in vague suspicions. She dealt in data. Hunches were hypotheses, and hypotheses needed to be tested. That evening, as Cole showered before a gala, she walked into their cavernous walk-in closet. His travel bag from the Chicago trip was still on a bench. With a clinical detachment she didn't know she possessed, she unzipped it. Tucked into a side pocket was a folded receipt. The Peninsula Chicago, Room 1812. Room service for one. $87.50. Her shoulders relaxed slightly. There it was. Proof. He was telling the truth. But as she went to put the receipt back, another piece of paper slipped out from behind it. It wasn't a receipt. It was a valet ticket. The Peninsula, New York. Date last Tuesday. Time in 7:15 p.m. Time out 32 a.m. The blood drained from her face. The Peninsula, New York, not Chicago. He had been in the city the entire time. The dinner at Le Bernardin, the late night. It wasn't a mistake. It was a lie, a carefully constructed, deliberate lie. Her mind, trained to find patterns and solve complex problems, began to connect the dots. The late-night investor calls that he always took out on the terrace, the sudden weekend golf trips to courses he'd never expressed interest in before, the new expensive cologne he'd started wearing, and the name that kept popping up in company emails and meeting minutes, Cassandra Rowe. Cassandra was a recent hire, a sharp, ambitious MBA from Wharton, who had quickly risen to become the vice president of business development. She was beautiful in a severe corporate way, with sharp cheekbones and a wardrobe of form-fitting power suits. Cole had championed her hiring, praising her aggressive, forward-thinking strategies. Ava had found her overly sycophantic, but had dismissed it as the behavior of an ambitious subordinate. Now she saw it in a different light. Ava walked out of the closet and sat on the edge of their bed, her heart hammering against her ribs. The valet ticket felt like a lead weight in her hand. For 10 years, she had dedicated her life to building this company, this life, this partnership. She had trusted Cole implicitly, believing that while their roles had diverged, their ultimate goal was the same. Now she saw the chilling truth. While she had been building an empire, he had been building a separate life within it. The porcelain facade of their perfect marriage had not just cracked, it was about to shatter. And as the initial shock gave way to a cold, crystalline fury, Ava Donovan knew one thing for certain. She would not be the one cut by the shards. The following Friday, Cole told Ava he had to fly to London for an emergency meeting with their European investors. "It's a complete firestorm," he said, packing a briefcase with feigned urgency. "The board is demanding a face-to-face. I'll be back Sunday morning. Don't wait up." Ava watched him, her expression a perfect mask of wifely concern. "Of course. Be safe." But this time she was prepared. She was no longer operating on suspicion. She was collecting data for a final, definitive proof. For the past week, she had been a ghost in her own life, observing, noting, and planning. She had installed a location-sharing app on his phone months ago, under the guise of security, a precaution he had readily agreed to. He had no idea she could access it from her own devices. An hour after he left for JFK, the app showed his phone's location pinging not at the airport, but at the Greenwich Hotel in Tribeca, a boutique hotel known for its privacy and exclusivity. Ava didn't rush. She didn't call him screaming accusations. Instead, a chilling calm settled over her. She took a shower, styled her hair, and put on a simple but elegant black dress. She looked in the mirror not at a betrayed wife, but at a CEO about to handle a hostile takeover. Her objective was not emotional release. It was confirmation. She drove herself downtown, her knuckles white on the steering wheel of her Tesla. The rage was there, a white-hot coil in her stomach, but her mind was icily clear. She parked a block away and walked to the hotel, the cool night air, doing little to quell the fire inside her. At the front desk, she smiled warmly at the concierge. "Hi. I'm supposed to be meeting my husband Cole Harrington. I believe he's already checked in. I'm so sorry, my phone just died, and he was supposed to send me the room number. She projected an air of breezy confidence, the kind of woman who belonged in a place like this. The concierge, a polished young man named Daniel, tapped at his computer. Of course, Mrs. Harrington. He's in the fireplace suite, room 402. Shall I call up for you? Oh no, please don't, she said, her smile never faltering. I want to surprise him. Of course, he replied, returning her smile. Enjoy your evening. As she walked towards the elevator, Ava felt a strange sense of dissociation, as if she were watching a character in a movie. The elevator ride was silent, the plush, wood-paneled car ascending like a slow-motion executioner's cart. When she reached the 4th floor, she walked down the dimly lit hallway, her heels making no sound on the thick carpet. She stood before room 402 for a long moment, taking a single deep breath. She had a spare keycard to all their accounts, another security measure she'd insisted on. She held it up to the sensor. The light flashed green with a soft electronic click. The door swung open silently. The suite was large, dominated by a roaring fireplace, and in the warm glow of the flames she saw them. Cole was on the sofa. His tie loosened a glass of whiskey in his hand. Kneeling before him, her back to the door, was Cassandra Rowe. Her sharp, tailored blazer was tossed over a chair, and she was wearing a silk blouse that was partially unbuttoned. She was laughing, reaching up to run a hand through Cole's hair. The scene was so intimate, so comfortable, so utterly devoid of the firestorm meeting he was supposed to be in, that the air was knocked from Ava's lungs. They hadn't heard her enter. The board is just a bunch of old men, Cole, Cassandra was saying, her voice dripping with dismissive arrogance. They don't see the future. You do. We do. Cole chuckled a low, smug sound. They just need to be managed. Don't worry about them. They'll fall in line. He leaned down to kiss her. It was then that he saw her. His eyes widened over Cassandra's shoulder, the color draining from his face. He froze his lips inches from hers. The smug confidence evaporated, replaced by a wave of pure, unadulterated panic. Cassandra, sensing the change, turned. Her own expression shifted from seduction to horror in a split second. She scrambled to her feet, fumbling with the buttons of her blouse. Silence. The only sound was the crackling of the fire. Ava didn't scream. She didn't cry. She didn't throw anything. She simply stood in the doorway, her gaze sweeping over the scene with the cool, analytical precision of an engineer diagnosing a catastrophic system failure. She looked at Cole's panicked face, at Cassandra's pathetic attempt to regain her composure, at the 2 half-empty glasses on the coffee table, at the rumpled cushions on the sofa. Data points. London looks a lot like Tribeca this time of year, Ava said, her voice unnervingly calm. Ava, this isn't what it looks like. Cole stammered, getting to his feet. It was the weakest, most cliché line imaginable, and it hung in the air like a foul odor. Really? Ava replied, a single eyebrow arched. Because it looks exactly like what it is. It looks like you've been lying to me. It looks like you've been using company resources to facilitate an affair with a subordinate. And it looks like you are monumentally stupid for thinking I wouldn't find out. Cassandra found her voice a high, reedy sound. This is a private matter. Ava's head snapped towards her, her eyes like chips of ice. When you sleep with the CEO of a publicly traded company, your work for it stops being a private matter, Ms. Rowe. It becomes a question of corporate governance, ethics, and fiduciary duty. You should know that. You went to Wharton after all. Cassandra visibly flinched. Ava's gaze returned to her husband. The hurt was there, a deep tectonic agony, but she refused to let him see it. Instead, she let him see the cold fury that was now crystallizing into purpose. "Get your things," she said to Cassandra, her voice leaving no room for argument. "You have 5 minutes to vacate this room." Then she looked at Cole, who stood there, utterly paralyzed. "You and I have a board meeting to prepare for." She turned and walked out, closing the door softly behind her. She didn't slam it. A slam would have been an emotional release. This was a tactical withdrawal. The battle was over. The war was just beginning. Ava didn't go home. The penthouse felt tainted, a stage set for a life that was no longer real. Instead, she drove to a quiet hotel in a different part of the city, checked in under her maiden name, and opened her laptop. The initial shockwave of betrayal was receding, replaced by the familiar hum of strategic thinking. Grief was a luxury she couldn't afford right now. Action was the only antidote. Her first call was to Robert Chen, a senior partner at Wachtell, Lipton, Rosen & Katz. Robert wasn't just any corporate lawyer. He was the razor-sharp, legal mind Ava had insisted on hiring when they first incorporated Innovate Dynamics. Cole had wanted a flashier firm one that sponsored golf tournaments. Ava had wanted the best. As with most things, she had won that argument. "Robert," she said when he picked up his voice, groggy with sleep. It was after midnight. "It's Ava Donovan. We have a situation. I need to invoke Article 4, Section 8B of the Innovate Dynamics Founding Charter." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Ava could almost hear the gears turning in Robert's formidable brain as he accessed a decade-old memory file. "Section 8B, he finally said, his voice now wide awake and sharp. "The moral turpitude and fiduciary integrity clause. Are you certain, Ava?" "I have definitive, inarguable proof," she replied, her voice as steady as steel. "I'll forward the documentation to your secure server within the hour. I'll be at my office at 6 a.m. We'll need to call an emergency board meeting." Robert said, his tone all business. "This is going to be a detonation." "I know," Ava said. "Bring a fire extinguisher." She hung up and began to assemble her case. This was her true genius. Not just in writing code, but in architecting systems, be they software or legal frameworks, to be robust, logical, and prepared for every contingency. 10 years ago, as a bright-eyed but already cautious co-founder, Ava had looked at the standard partnership agreements and found them lacking. They protected against financial malfeasance, criminal activity, and gross negligence. But they didn't protect against the more insidious threats, arrogance, recklessness, and the kind of personal behavior that could irrevocably damage the company's reputation and internal morale. So with Robert Chen's help, she had drafted Section 8B. It was a unique and powerful clause buried deep within the legal boilerplate of the company's charter, a document Cole had famously boasted of not reading, saying, "That's what I pay lawyers for." The clause stipulated that if a C-suite executive, specifically one holding a key founder designation, which only applied to Cole and Ava, were found to have engaged in conduct constituting moral turpitude, which included but was not limited to using company assets to facilitate an illicit relationship, or engaging in a relationship with a subordinate that compromises corporate integrity, then a very specific chain of events would be triggered. The offending party would be deemed to have breached their fiduciary duty to the company. This breach would automatically trigger a mandatory buyout provision of their controlling shares. But it wasn't a simple market value buyout. The clause stated that the non-offending key founder would have the primary and exclusive right to purchase all of the offending founders' voting shares for a predetermined price, the original par value from the company's first seed round of funding. For Cole's 40% stake in a company now worth billions, that price was a paltry $40,000. It was a nuclear option, a doomsday device Ava had built into the very DNA of their company. She had hoped she would never have to use it. She had created it not out of a premonition of infidelity, but from a pragmatic engineer's desire to protect the system she was building from its most unpredictable variable human behavior. Cole's ego was both his greatest asset and his greatest liability. Ava had simply coded a backstop for the liability. For the next few hours, Ava worked with methodical precision. She compiled the evidence, the credit card statement from Le Bernardin, the valet ticket from the Peninsula, New York, that contradicted his expense report for the Chicago trip, a screenshot of his phone's location data from that evening, and a calm, factual written affidavit of what she had witnessed in room 402 of the Greenwich Hotel. She also cross-referenced Cassandra Rowe's travel and expense reports, quickly finding a pattern of booking flights and hotels that mirrored Cole's on his solo business trips. It was a clean, irrefutable chain of evidence demonstrating a pattern of deceit and the misuse of company funds. When she was done, she didn't feel triumph. She felt a profound, aching sadness. The system had worked as designed. The bug had been identified. But it meant the core programming of her life was fundamentally corrupted and had to be purged. She had architected the perfect corporate coup, but in doing so, she had to acknowledge the utter failure of her marriage. She sent the encrypted file to Robert Chen at 4:37 a.m. Then, for the first time that night, she closed her laptop, curled up on the hotel bed, and allowed herself a few moments to weep for the man she thought she had married and the partnership she thought they had built. The tears were brief and hot. When they stopped, only cold resolve remained. The architect had her blueprint. Now it was time to build. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. Monday morning. Cole, after a weekend of frantic unanswered calls and texts to Ava, arrived looking haggard but defiant. He had clearly convinced himself this was a domestic dispute that had foolishly spilled into the professional sphere. He saw it as an embarrassment to be managed afire, to be stamped out with his signature charm and a public relations strategy. He walked into the 80th floor boardroom, ready to apologize for his lapse in judgment and assure the board it would not affect the company's performance. He was not prepared for what awaited him. Ava was already there, seated at the head of the long mahogany table, a spot usually reserved for him. She was dressed in a charcoal gray suit, her posture impeccable, her face serene and unreadable. Beside her sat Robert Chen, his files laid out before him with surgical precision. The other 6 board members were seated, their expressions a mixture of confusion, concern, and apprehension. They had been summoned with no agenda, only a note citing a matter of urgent corporate governance. Cole faltered for a second, seeing Ava in his chair. "Ava, what is this? I think we should discuss this privately," he said, trying to project an air of calm authority. "We are long past a private discussion, Cole," Ava replied, her voice even and clear, carrying across the silent room. "Please take a seat." She gestured to an empty chair on the side. The power dynamic was immediately shockingly clear. He was no longer the host of this meeting. He was a guest. He hesitated, then, seeing the stony faces of the board, reluctantly sat down. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," Ava began, her eyes scanning each board member. I have called this meeting to address a grave breach of fiduciary duty by our CEO, Mr. Harrington, and to invoke a non-negotiable remedy as stipulated in our corporate charter." A murmur went through the room. George Findlay, a gruff old-school investor and the board's longest-serving member, scowled. "Ava, with all due respect, if this is about a personal matter—" "It ceased to be a personal matter, George." Ava cut in, her tone sharp but respectful. "When Mr. Harrington began using company funds to conduct an affair with a subordinate, falsifying expense reports to cover his tracks and compromising the ethical integrity of this entire organization." Cole turned purple. "This is an outrageous slander. It's a private issue being twisted." "Robert," Ava said calmly, ignoring Cole's outburst. Robert Chen stood up. "Each of you has a tablet in front of you," he said, his voice dry and factual. "You will find a secured file containing evidence of Mr. Harrington's activities. This includes falsified expense reports, credit card statements showing non-business-related expenditures, and location data that directly contradicts his official company travel itinerary. You will also find a sworn affidavit from Mrs. Donovan." As the board members began swiping through the files, the atmosphere in the room turned arctic. Jaws tightened, eyes widened. George Findlay's scowl deepened into a look of profound disgust. "Furthermore," Robert continued, "these actions constitute a clear violation of Article 4, Section 8B of the Innovate Dynamics Founding Charter, which all of you ratified upon joining this board. The clause is titled Moral Turpitude and Fiduciary Integrity." He projected the clause onto the large screen at the end of the room. The dense legalese appeared in stark black and white. Robert walked the board through it, his words precise and devastating. He explained how Cole's actions had triggered the clause, and he laid out the unavoidable consequence. And as such, the non-offending key founder, Mrs. Ava Donovan, now holds the exclusive right to purchase Mr. Harrington's entire stake of 8 million voting shares for their original pair value of half a cent per share. The total purchase price is $40,000. The silence that followed was absolute. It was as if all the oxygen had been sucked out of the room. The board members stared at the screen, then at Ava, then at Cole, who looked as if he'd been struck by lightning. "This is insane," Cole finally exploded, slamming his fist on the table. "You can't be serious." "A vendetta clause. This is theft. I built this company." "We built this company," Ava corrected him, her voice quiet but carrying immense weight. "You were the face, Cole. I was the foundation. And I built the foundation to last with fail-safes to protect it from catastrophic failure. You signed the document. You agreed to the terms. Your personal behavior is the catastrophe." George Findlay looked at Robert Chen. "Is this legally binding?" "It is ironclad," Robert stated. "Drafted, signed, and ratified. The evidence of the breach is, in my professional opinion, indisputable." Ava slid a cashier's check across the table. It slid to a stop directly in front of Cole. It was made out to him in the amount of $40,000. "This is your severance, Cole," Ava said. "The transaction is effective immediately. As the new majority shareholder, my first act is to call a vote. I move to remove Cole Harrington as CEO and chairman of the board of Innovate Dynamics, effective immediately for cause." She looked around the table. "All in favor?" One by one, the hands went up. Some reluctantly, some with a grim sense of duty. George Findlay was the last, his eyes locking with Ava's, for a long moment before his hand rose decisively. It was unanimous. Cole Harrington, the charismatic titan of the tech world, sat staring at the check, his face a mask of disbelief and incandescent rage. He had walked into the room a billionaire CEO in command of his empire. He would walk out with nothing but 40,000 and the smoldering ruins of his life. Ava stood up, her expression unchanging. "The second order of business," she announced to the stunned room, "is to appoint an interim CEO. I nominate myself. We have a company to stabilize." The coup was complete. It was swift, brutal, and executed with devastating precision. The architect had not just evicted the tenant. She had reclaimed the entire building. The news of Cole Harrington's immediate resignation and Ava Donovan's appointment as interim CEO hit Innovate Dynamics like a shockwave. The official press release, carefully crafted by Robert Chen and a crisis PR team, was a masterpiece of corporate euphemism, citing personal reasons and a desire for Cole to pursue other opportunities. But within the glass walls of the company, the rumor mill churned at light speed. Cassandra Rowe was fired before the board meeting had even concluded. Her termination was handled swiftly and silently, by HR citing a gross violation of the company's code of conduct. She was escorted from the building with a small box of her personal effects, her meteoric rise ending in an abrupt and humiliating fall. She was a footnote in the larger drama, a casualty of a war she hadn't even known was being waged. Ava's first day as CEO was a trial by fire. She walked into the executive suite, a floor she had rarely visited, and found a staff accustomed to Cole's larger-than-life, charm-based leadership. They now faced a woman they barely knew, one they had mentally catalogued as the CEO's quiet wife. They saw her as a placeholder, a grieving spouse, thrust into a role she couldn't possibly handle. Her first meeting was with the senior leadership team. They sat around the conference table, their expressions guarded their body language skeptical. They were Cole's guys' men he had hired for their loyalty and salesmanship. "I understand this is an abrupt transition," Ava began, her voice calm and measured. "And I know many of you have questions. My priority right now is stability and continuity. Our clients, our products, and our employees are what matter. The mission of Innovate Dynamics has not changed." The VP of Sales, a slick, overconfident man named Mark Walton, leaned back in his chair. With all due respect, Ava Cole was the rainmaker. He had the relationships. Who's going to be the face of the company now? It was a direct challenge to her authority. The entire room waited to see how she would respond. "The face of the company will be its performance," Ava replied without missing a beat. "For too long, we've relied on one man's personality. From now on, we will rely on the strength of our product and the quality of our execution. Our numbers will speak for us. Our technology will be our brand." She then pivoted, demonstrating a level of operational knowledge that stunned them. "Mark, your team's conversion rate in the Midwest has been lagging by 12% for 2 quarters. I believe it's due to a failure to properly demonstrate the Nexus 7 predictive analytics module." "Ben," she said, turning to the head of engineering, a man she had worked with for years, "I want you to assign 2 of your top systems analysts to Mark's team for the next month to provide deep-dive technical support on their sales calls." She went around the room addressing each department head with a similar incisive command of their metrics, challenges, and personnel. She knew their projects, their budgets, their sticking points. The VPs who had expected a soft, emotional speech were left scrambling to keep up. She wasn't talking about vision or synergy. She was talking about server uptime, API integration, and supply chain logistics. She was speaking the language of the machine she had built. The skepticism in the room slowly began to curdle into a grudging respect. This was not the woman they saw in society magazines. This was someone who knew the guts of the company better than they did. But the internal battle was only half the problem. The external one was just beginning. Cole, stripped of his power, but not his connections, was not going away quietly. He immediately began a whisper campaign against Ava. He called friendly journalists, influential investors, and former colleagues, painting himself as the victim of a vindictive, power-hungry wife who had used a legal technicality to steal his life's work. The narrative he spun was insidious and effective. Ava was an engineer, not a leader, a glorified coder who had no business running a multi-billion-dollar company. The market reacted with uncertainty. Innovate Dynamics stock, which had soared under Cole's charismatic leadership, wobbled, dropping % in the first 48 hours. George Findlay, the formidable board member, called her into his office at the end of her second day. The room was old-world wealth filled with dark wood and leather-bound books. "The street is nervous, Ava," he said, his voice a low rumble. "They see Cole as the visionary. They see you as an unknown quantity. This stunt you pulled in the boardroom was brilliant, I'll grant you that. But now you have to prove you can actually fly the plane." "I don't need to fly it, George," Ava replied, meeting his intense gaze without flinching. "I built the engine. I know how it works. Cole was just the pilot who liked to wave at the crowds from the cockpit." George studied her for a long moment, a flicker of something, perhaps respect, in his eyes. "The market doesn't care about who built the engine. It cares about quarterly earnings and forward guidance. You have 1 quarter, Ava. 1 quarter to stabilize the stock and prove that you are not just an interim solution. If you can't, the board will have no choice but to initiate a search for a permanent CEO." It was an ultimatum. A throne was one thing to seize, but another thing entirely to hold. The crown felt heavy on her head, and Ava knew that the people who had just watched her depose the king were now waiting to see if the new queen would stumble. The first few weeks were brutal. Cole's shadow loomed large over the company, and his campaign to undermine Ava was relentless and cunning. He knew the company's pressure points because he had helped create them. His first move was to poach 2 of Innovate Dynamics' top salespeople, luring them to a competitor with massive signing bonuses and promises of equity. The move was calculated to hit Ava where she was weakest client-facing relationships. He followed this by leaking a carefully selected out-of-context internal memo to a tech blog suggesting that Innovate Dynamics was planning to sunset a popular legacy product, causing panic among a key segment of their customer base. The phone lines lit up. Ava's inbox was a raging inferno of concerned clients, anxious investors, and opportunistic competitors. The boardroom, which she had commanded so decisively, now felt like a lonely island in a sea of doubt. The senior VPs, while outwardly compliant, were hedging their bets, their loyalty still a flickering flame. Ava responded not with panic, but with process. She understood that a storm was not something you could fight head-on. It was something you had to navigate with precision and strength. She worked 18-hour days, fueled by coffee and a cold, burning determination to prove everyone wrong. Instead of trying to replicate Cole's charm offensive, she leaned into her own strengths, data transparency, and technical superiority. She personally called every single client affected by the leaked memo. She didn't offer platitudes or sales speak. She walked them through the product roadmap herself, explaining the technical reasons for the eventual migration and demonstrating the superior capabilities of the new system. She was candid, brilliant, and utterly convincing. She didn't sell them a dream. She gave them a blueprint. Several clients who had been on the verge of leaving ended up signing early adopter contracts for the new platform. Internally, she focused on shoring up her base. She knew she couldn't win over Cole's loyalists overnight. Instead, she focused on the heart of the company, the engineers, the developers, and the project managers. The people who, like her, had been working in the shadows for years. She spent hours every day, not in the executive suite, but down in the engineering pits. She held town halls with the coders, not in the formal auditorium, but in their break rooms, surrounded by whiteboards and empty pizza boxes. She didn't give speeches. She asked questions. What were their biggest frustrations? What bureaucratic hurdles were slowing them down? What tools did they need? Ben Carter, her longtime head of engineering, watched the transformation with quiet admiration. Cole would come down here once a quarter for a photo op, he told a group of senior developers. Ava comes down here to help us debug a kernel panic. She authorized a new budget for top-of-the-line development hardware, something the engineers had been requesting for years. But Cole had dismissed as an unnecessary expense. She streamlined the approval process for new projects, cutting through layers of red tape that had stifled innovation. She implemented a Founders Award, a significant cash bonus for any employee who developed a patentable innovation for the company. Morale, which had plummeted after Cole's ousting, began to climb. The engineers who had long felt undervalued now felt seen and empowered. They had a leader who spoke their language, who understood their work, and who respected their contributions. They began to work with a renewed sense of purpose, not for the stock price or the CEO, but for the product itself, and for the woman who had always been one of them. Cole's sabotage attempts continued. He used his connections to try and block a crucial supply chain deal for new server components. When Ava found out, she didn't try to go through the same channels. She dug into the technical specifications and found a smaller, more innovative supplier in Finland that could provide superior hardware at a 15% lower cost. She flew to Helsinki herself, met with their engineers, and closed the deal in 36 hours. She was fighting a guerrilla war against a ghost. Cole was attacking the company's reputation and relationships. Ava was fortifying its foundation, making it stronger, faster, and more efficient from the inside out. One night, working late in her new office, the same one where Cole used to entertain reporters, she looked out at the glittering city. She was exhausted, lonelier than she had ever been, and facing a battle that was far from over. But for the first time in a long time, she felt a sense of clarity. The gilded cage was gone. The storm was raging, but she was at the helm of her own ship, navigating with her own map. And for the first time, she truly believed she could bring it safely to shore. The question was whether the board and the market would give her enough time to do it. For 2 months, Ava played defense. She stabilized the company, reassured clients, and bolstered internal morale. She had successfully weathered the storm. Now it was time to change the weather. She knew that to truly secure her position and the future of Innovate Dynamics, she couldn't just survive Cole's attacks. She had to definitively end them. Her counteroffensive began in the one place Cole would never expect: the company's financial archives. Cole had always viewed the accounting department as a boring necessity, a team of number crunchers who just processed his expense reports. Ava, however, saw it as a repository of data, a log file of the company's history. And like any good engineer, she knew that log files often contained evidence of critical errors. With a team of discreet forensic accountants, she initiated a full audit of the past 5 years of executive spending, focusing on a series of venture funds and shell corporations Cole had set up for strategic acquisitions. On the surface, they looked legitimate, but Ava, with her intimate knowledge of the company's operations, knew that several of these acquisitions had never been integrated into their tech stack. They were ghost assets. After weeks of painstaking work, tracing wire transfers and cross-referencing invoices, the accountants found the smoking gun. Cole had been using a subsidiary shell corporation, Harrington Ventures, to systematically siphon company funds. He would use Innovate Dynamics capital to invest in promising startups only for those startups to then hire his personal consulting firm for exorbitant fees. He was essentially paying himself with company money, dressing it up as strategic investment. It was a sophisticated scheme, cleverly hidden behind layers of corporate jargon and legal entities. It wasn't just unethical. It was felony-grade embezzlement. Ava now held a weapon far more powerful than the morality clause. This wasn't about personal betrayal. This was a direct crime against the company and its shareholders. Her second line of attack was aimed at the market. She knew she needed a definitive win, a bold stroke that would silence the doubters and prove that Innovate Dynamics was not just surviving, but thriving under her leadership. She set her sights on a contract that Cole had been chasing for over a year and had spectacularly failed to land a complete logistics overhaul for Titan Retail, the largest e-commerce giant in the world. Cole had tried to win them over with lavish dinners, golf games, and grand promises. Ava read the technical briefs and realized the Titan team wasn't interested in charm. They were engineers with a massive, complex problem, so she approached them differently. She didn't ask for a meeting with their CEO. She requested a technical workshop with their chief technology officer and lead architects. She flew to their Seattle headquarters, not with a sales team, but with Ben Carter and 2 of her top developers. For 2 days, they didn't present a single PowerPoint slide. Instead, they whiteboarded. They dove deep into Titan's existing infrastructure, identifying bottlenecks and inefficiencies that Titan's own team hadn't seen. Then Ava unveiled her solution, not just a sale of their Nexus 7 software, but a proposal to create a bespoke, deeply integrated platform, Nexus Prime, built specifically for Titan's unique scale. It was an audacious, incredibly complex proposal that would require a massive commitment of resources. It was also brilliant. The Titan CTO, a woman known for her no-nonsense engineering-first approach, was visibly impressed. No CEO has ever come in here and talked to me about kernel-level data processing, she said. They just want to take my boss to dinner. You're offering a real solution. A week later, Innovate Dynamics was awarded the Titan Retail contract. It was the largest deal in the company's history, valued at over $500 million over 5 years. The news hit the financial world like a thunderclap. The day of the announcement, Innovate Dynamics stock didn't just stabilize. It soared, jumping 22% in a single day of trading, reaching an all-time high. The narrative instantly flipped. Ava Donovan was no longer the interim CEO or the jilted wife. She was the visionary leader who had landed the contract of the decade. The tech blogs that had questioned her ability were now running glowing profiles about her strategic genius. With the company's future secured and her reputation cemented, Ava made her final move. She called a private meeting with Cole and his lawyer. She didn't bring Robert Chen. She went alone. They met in a sterile conference room at a neutral law firm. Cole walked in with a familiar swagger, likely believing the soaring stock price gave him new leverage to negotiate a better exit package. Ava didn't waste time with pleasantries. She slid a single folder across the table. Inside was a summary of the forensic accountant's report detailing the embezzlement scheme from Harrington Ventures. Cole's face went white as he read it. The swagger vanished, replaced by the same raw panic she had seen in the hotel room. The district attorney's office would be very interested in this, Ava said, her voice devoid of emotion. Fraud embezzlement. That carries a mandatory prison sentence, Cole. And I doubt you'd enjoy the view from a cell as much as the one from the penthouse. She then slid a second document across the table. It was a settlement agreement. It stipulated that Cole would publicly release a statement praising her leadership and wishing the company well. He would sign an ironclad non-disclosure and non-compete agreement. In exchange for his full and immediate cooperation, the findings of the audit would remain sealed. "You have no more moves left, Cole," she said, her voice quiet but absolute. "This isn't a negotiation. It's the period at the end of the sentence. You can either be a disgraced, forgotten ex-CEO, or you can be a convicted felon. The choice is yours." He stared at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of hatred and defeat. He was looking at the woman he had dismissed, underestimated, and betrayed. And he finally saw her for who she was. The architect of his rise, and now the architect of his utter, complete ruin. Checkmate. The final severance agreement was signed. Cole Harrington vanished from the tech world as quickly as he had risen. His public statement was bland and complimentary, a final humiliating act of capitulation. He took a modest buyout for his few remaining non-controlling shares and retired to a life of obscurity, the ghost of his former glory. The whispers against Ava ceased, replaced by an awed respect in the corridors of Silicon Valley and Wall Street. 3 months after the boardroom coup, George Findlay called another board meeting. Ava walked in, expecting another grilling on quarterly projections. Instead, she found the board members standing, and as she entered, they began to applaud. George, his usual gruff expression replaced with a genuine smile, held up a glass. "To our CEO," he said, his voice booming in the quiet room, "who has not only weathered the storm, but has steered this company into a new era of prosperity and integrity. The board has voted unanimously. The interim tag is officially removed. Congratulations, Madam CEO." Ava felt a warmth spread through her chest, a feeling that was more satisfying than any stock price or news headline. It was the feeling of earned respect. In the months that followed, Innovate Dynamics was transformed. The culture shifted from one driven by personality and salesmanship to one driven by innovation, collaboration, and excellence. Ava promoted from within, elevating talented engineers and managers who had been overlooked in the previous regime. Ben Carter became her chief technology officer, her trusted right hand. The company became known not just for its profits, but as one of the best places to work in the tech industry. The penthouse on the 72nd floor was sold. Ava moved into a chic, modern apartment downtown, a space that was entirely her own, filled with books, art, and technology. Her home office was no longer a sanctuary from a hollow life. It was a command center for a fulfilling one. One evening, nearly a year after that fateful night at the Greenwich Hotel, Ava stood at the window of her new office, the one she had earned looking out at the city lights. The view was just as spectacular, but it felt different. She wasn't looking down on a world conquered by someone else, a world she had helped build in secret. She was looking out at her city, her company, her future. She had lost a husband, a marriage, and the life she thought she knew. But in the wreckage, she had not found ruin. She had found herself. She had reclaimed her name, her work, and her power. She was no longer the silent partner, the woman behind the man. She was Ava Donovan, the CEO of Innovate Dynamics, and she was just getting started. The architect was finally living in the cathedral she had built. Ava Donovan's story, is a powerful reminder that the quietest person in the room is often the most powerful. She transformed the deepest personal betrayal into a catalyst for an incredible professional triumph. It wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming what was rightfully hers and proving that true leadership isn't about charm or charisma, but about competence, integrity, and unwavering strength. Her journey from the shadows to the CEO's chair shows that the best laid plans are the ones you make for yourself long before you ever need them. If her story of resilience and strategic brilliance resonated with you, please give this video a like and share it with someone who needs to be reminded of their own hidden strength. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell for more real-life stories of incredible triumphs and dramatic twists. What part of Ava's story impressed you the most? Let us know in the comments below.